Good day to you all. I am Mark Vincent Jopsane, and in this video, we will discuss about the internal rules, ownership, and transactions of a corporation. First in our discussion is the Title 5 of the Revised Corporation Code, Bylaws. Firstly, what are bylaws? Bylaws are the rules and regulations or private laws enacted by the corporation to regulate the conduct and define the rights and duties of the corporators towards the corporations and among themselves. Now we will proceed to the Section 45 of the Revised Corporation Code, which discusses about the adoption of bylaws. There can be two ways to adopt bylaws. First is before incorporation or pre-incorporation. In pre-incorporation, the bylaws must be signed by all the incorporators and filed with the SEC along with the Articles of Incorporation. The second is after the incorporation or post-incorporation. In this case, it requires the affirmative vote of at least a majority of the outstanding capital stock or of at least a majority of the members, and it must be signed by the stockholders and members voting for them. There are cases such as in corporations governed by special laws, such as banks and loan companies, wherein the filing or amendment thereto of bylaws are not accepted by the Commission unless they are accompanied by a certificate of the appropriate government agency to the effect that such bylaws or amendments thereto are in accordance with the law. Now we will proceed to the Section 46 of the Revised Corporation Code, which discusses about the contents of bylaws. A private corporation may provide the following in its bylaws. A. The time, place, and manner of calling and conducting regular or special meetings of the directors or trustees. B. The time and manner of calling and conducting regular or special meetings and mode of notifying the stockholders or members thereof. C. The required quorum in meetings of stockholders or members and the manner of voting therein. D. The modes by which a stockholder, member, director, or trustees may attend meetings and cast their votes. E. The form for proxies of stockholders and members and the manner of voting them. F. The directors or trustees' qualifications, duties, and responsibilities, the guidelines for setting the compensation of directors or trustees and officers, and the maximum number of other board representations that an independent director or trustee may have, which shall in no case be more than the number prescribed by the Commission. G. The time for holding the annual election of directors or trustees, and the mode or manner of giving notice thereof. H. The manner of election or appointment, and the term of officers other than directors or trustees. I. The penalties for violations of the bylaws. J. In the case of stock corporations, the manner of issuing stock certificates. And lastly, K. Such other matters as may be necessary for the proper or convenient transactions of its corporate affairs for the promotion of good governance and anti-graft and corruption measures. On to the next section, Section 47, which discusses about the amendment or repeal of bylaws and adoption of new bylaws. The requirements to amend or repeal bylaws and adopt new bylaws are: first is the majority vote of the board of directors or trustees. Then, the vote of the owners of at least the majority of the outstanding capital stock or at least the majority of the members in case of non-stock corporation. Then, in all cases, they can only be exercised at a regular or special meeting duly called for the purpose, of course, with prior notice. Lastly, like in the adoption of bylaws, even holders of non-voting shares or non-voting members, in case of non-stock corporation, are entitled to vote in the matter. The voting power can be delegated. The owner of at least two-thirds of the outstanding capital stock, or at least two-thirds of the members, may delegate the power to amend or repeal the bylaws and the adoption of new bylaws to the board of directors or trustees, provided that it will be revoked in the event that the stockholder owning the majority of the outstanding capital stock or majority of the members shall so vote at a regular or special meeting. The stockholders or members' resolution authorizing the delegation of power to amend and or adopt new bylaws duly certified under oath by the corporate secretary shall be filed with the amended and or new bylaws. Of course, the amended or new bylaws shall only be effective upon the issuance of the Commission of a certification that is the same in accordance with the revised Corporation Code and other relevant laws. Let us now proceed to the Title 6 of the revised Corporation Code, which will discuss about corporate meetings. According to Section 48, the meetings of directors, trustees, stockholders, and members can be regular or special. This will then be expanded in Section 49, which will talk about the regular and special meeting of stockholders and members. We will first differentiate the two kinds of meeting, regular and special, into three categories, mainly their purpose, frequency, and their notice period. First is purpose. The purpose of regular meetings are all about general corporate matters, such as election of directors or trustees, approval of annual reports, and other routine matters. In special meetings, its purpose is only for specific or urgent matters requiring the shareholder or members' approval. Next category is frequency. In regular meetings, it shall be held annually on a date fixed in the bylaws, or if not fixed in the bylaws, at any date after April 15 of every year as determined by the board of directors or trustees. Meanwhile, in special meetings, it is determined by the board of directors or trustees whenever urgent or needed. The last category is the notice period. Notices are a written document or electronic mail that ensures that the stockholder or members are properly informed of the time, place, and purpose of the meeting. In regular meetings, the written notice shall be sent to the stockholders or members of records at least 21 days before the meeting, unless the bylaws or laws provide otherwise. On the other hand, in special meetings, the written notice shall be sent to the stockholders or members of records at least 1 week before the meeting, unless the bylaws or laws provide otherwise. Notice of any meeting may be waived expressly or implicitly by any stockholder or member, provided that the general waivers of notice in the Articles of Incorporation or the bylaws shall not be allowed. Provided, further, that the attendance of a meeting shall constitute a waiver of notice of such meeting, except when the person attends a meeting for the express purpose of objecting to the transaction of any business because the meeting is not lawfully called or convened. In case of postponement of stockholders of members' regular meetings, a written notice thereof and the reason thereof, therefore, shall be sent to the stockholders or members of records at least 2 weeks prior to the date of the meeting, unless a different period is required under the bylaws, law, or regulation. The right to vote of stockholders or members may be exercised in person or remote communication wherein they participate through video conferencing, teleconferencing, or other digital platforms. And lastly, they can exercise the right to vote in absentia. It is by mail, email, or electronic ballot, wherein they are not present at all in the meeting and not participating. Next is the section 50, pertaining to the place and time of meetings of stockholders and members. It indicates that whether regular or special, it shall be held in the principal office of the corporation as set forth in the Articles of Incorporation, or if not practicable, in the city or municipality where the principal office of the corporation is located, provided that any of the city or municipality in Metro Manila, Metro Cebu, Metro Davao, and other metropolitan areas shall, for purposes of this section, be considered a city or municipality. All proceedings and any business transacted at a meeting of the stockholders or members, if within the powers or authority of the corporation, shall be valid even if the meeting is improperly held or called, provided that all the stockholders or members of the corporation are present or duly represented at the meeting, and not one of them expressly states at the beginning of the meeting that the purpose of their attendance is to object to the transaction of any business because the meeting is not lawfully called or convened. We will now proceed to section 51, which defines the quorum in meetings. It states that a quorum shall consist of the stockholders representing a majority of the outstanding capital stock or a majority of the members in the case of non-stock corporation. When we say majority, it refers to the more than half of the whole or greater than 50%. Moving forward, Section 52 is concerned about the regular and special meetings of directors or trustees. A majority of the directors or trustees, as stated in the Articles of Incorporation, shall constitute a quorum to transact corporate business. And every decision reached by at least a majority of the directors or trustees constituting a quorum shall be valid as a corporate act. The frequency of the regular meetings of directors or trustees shall be held monthly, unless the bylaws provide otherwise. It is monthly because the directors or trustees are the core in the decision-making of the corporation. Meanwhile, the special meetings of directors or trustees may be held at any time upon the call of the president or as provided in the bylaws. The place of both regular meetings and special meetings of directors or trustees may be held anywhere in or outside the Philippines, unless the bylaws provide otherwise. The notice of both regular and special meetings must be sent to every director or trustee at least 2 days prior to the scheduled meeting, unless a longer time is provided in the bylaws. Moving on, Section 53 corresponds to the one who shall preside at meetings. It indicates that the chairman, or in his absence, the president, shall preside at all meetings of the directors or trustees, as well as of the stockholders or members, unless the bylaws provide otherwise. whenever for any cause. There is no person authorized or the person authorized unjustly refuses to call a meeting. The Commission, upon petition of a stockholder or member on a showing of good cause therefore, may issue an order directing the petitioning stockholder or member to call a meeting of the corporation by giving proper notice required by the revised corporation code or the bylaws. The petitioning stockholder or member shall preside thereat until at least a majority of the stockholders or members present have chosen from among themselves. We will now advance to the Section 54 of the Revised Corporation Code. It presides over the rights to vote of secures creditor and administrators. In case a stockholder grants security interest in his or her shares in stock corporations, the stockholder grantor shall have the right to attend and vote at meetings of stockholders, unless the secured creditor is expressly given by the stockholder grantor such right in writing, which is recorded in the appropriate corporate books. The stockholder grantor still have the right to vote because there is no transfer of ownership of the stocks given. Executors, administrators, receivers, and other legal representatives duly appointed by the court may attend and vote on behalf of the stockholders or members without need of any written proxy. There is no need for any written proxy since the court has the higher power than any private agreements. And that is all for my part. Thank you.
Section 55 to 65 of the Revised Corporation means talks about voting, proxies, voting trust, and stock rules under our SEC. So let's go first with Section 55. Section 55 talks about voting in joint ownership of shares or stocks. There are shares that are jointly owned by two or more persons. Say, for example, a share is owned by A and B. In voting, they must get a consent from the other person for it to be valid. Let's say, for example, the share is owned by A and B. A should ask consent from B for him to vote, except for those shares that are and slash or. Those kind of shares are the exception to this general rule. Let's say, for example, the stock is owned by A slash or the stock is owned by A and slash or B. In this kind of scenario, there's no need for consent. A can vote on the share. Another thing is they can appoint a proxy, regardless of what kind of share it is. They can appoint a proxy as long as they provide their consent. But the proxy or the substitute for voting can only last up to 5 years. And if there's no stipulation, it can only last for one meeting. Section 56 talks about treasury shares. Treasury shares have no voting rights and no rights to receive dividends as long as they remain on the treasury. Section 57 talks about the manner of voting and proxies. A stockholder or a proxy may vote in person. They may vote by proxy, or they can also vote online or in absentia, or remote communication, if allowed by the bylaws. So let's say, for example, there's a voting happening, and A cannot attend the meeting. If there's a statement in the bylaw that allows voting in absentia, then he can vote as long as his vote um, comes in before finishing the tally of votes. For remote voting, the votes must be first received by the boards before tallying of the vote ends. Second, it should be allowed or authorized by the bylaws. And third, um, the stockholder voting in absentia or through remote communication is considered present for quorum. For proxy, the proxy must be filed in writing to the secretary of the corporation. Second, it's only valid for the intended meeting if there's no stipulation. But the parties can stipulate that it can last for more than one meeting as long as it doesn't exceed 5 years, which is the threshold for proxy. Section 58 talks about voting trusts. In corporations, um, you can create a voting trust agreement or VTA. Voting trust agreements are contracts wherein you're entrusting your share to another person. Let's say, for example, A entrusts his shares to B. The stock certificate will be canceled with A and it will be reissued to B. Um, the important requirements in filing or going into a VTA contract, it must be in writing and it must be notarized. It also must be filed in the corporation as well as with the SEC. Third, the stock certificates are canceled and reissued to the trustee, like what I've mentioned earlier. And the trustee gives voting trust certificates to stockholders. The duration of VTA is the same with the proxy. It cannot exceed 5 years. Exception is if there is a loan agreement and the VTA is for the payment of the loan. Let's say, for example, the loan is 7 years. So basically, it already exceeds 5 years. But since the purpose of the voting trust agreement is for the payment of a loan, then it can be allowed. For the rights of the trustee has the right to vote on the shares. And the second right, both the trustee and the trustor, the original stockholder, still has the right to inspect the books. There are also some restrictions in voting trust agreements. It cannot be created to circumvent laws. It can circumvent competition laws. It cannot also be created to commit fraud. And lastly, it cannot be created to evade or to avoid nationality requirements in corporations. Upon expiration of the VTA or voting trust agreement, the stock certificate will now be reissued or returned to the original stockholder or the trustor since the VTA already expired. Section 59 talks about subscription contracts. A subscription contract is any contract to acquire unissued shares, whether it's pre-incorporation or post-incorporation. Um, Even if they call it something else other than purchase. For Section 60, this talks about pre-incorporation subscription. These are subscription to shares before the corporation is even formed or incorporated. A subscription to a corporation um, that is still not yet created or not yet incorporated is irrevocable for 6 months. Meaning, once you enter into a subscription contract, you cannot cancel it for the next 6 months. Unless, of course, if all the subscriber consent that they also want to cancel their subscriptions. And second, if the corporation failed to incorporate within 6 months. So let's say, for example, A wanted to buy shares of corporation ABC. And he wants to cancel his subscription contract. But the other subscribers did not consent to that, then uh, he can wait for 6 months, and if the corporation failed to incorporate within 6 months, then he can cancel his subscription contract. Section 61 talks about the valid considerations for stocks. First of all, stocks can only be issued um, with the par value or issued price. It cannot be issued below the par value. The valid considerations for the purchase of shares are cash, property, either tangible or intangible. We also have labor that were actually performed and services that were actually performed. Also have shares of other corporations, retained earnings transferred to capital stocks, and exchange of outstanding shares, also called as reclassification. The examples of considerations that are not allowed are promissory notes and future services. So anything that is not certain or did not hasn't happened yet is not valid for consideration. For properties, for tangible properties or intangible properties, the valuation depends on the board of directors, and it must be subject to SEC approval. So let's say, for example, A wants to buy a share and he wants to pay using his land, his parcel of land. Now, uh, Director B will value this land and will submit it to SEC for approval. And if the SEC deems his valuation valid, then they can record it on their books. For no par shares or no par value shares, the issued price may be fixed first by the articles of incorporation, second by the board of directors if authorized by the bylaws, and third, if it cannot be fixed on those first two, the majority of outstanding shares can fix the price for the no par value shares. Section 62 talks about certificate of stock and transfer of shares. The certificate of stock must be signed by the president of the corporation or the vice president of the corporation. It must be countersigned by the secretary or the assistant secretary, and it also must be sealed with the corporate seal to make it valid. For transfer of shares, there are requirements for it to be valid. First, the transfer must be by delivery and endorsement, both of those. Second, it must be recorded in the corporate transfer books for it to be binding with third persons. And third, unpaid shares cannot be transferred. So those subscribed shares that haven't been paid yet, including the interests and accrued interests, those are not valid for transfers. For uncertificated or scriptless shares, these are allowed by the SEC if it's approved. So some corporations can issue scriptless shares or shares with no stock certificate. Section 63 talks about issuance of stock certificates. As I've mentioned earlier, the stock certificates cannot be issued if the share hasn't been fully paid yet. This includes the interests. Let's say, for example, the subscription contracts um, has has a clause that says you should pay 10% interest per year. So all those accrued interests that you have that have piled up needs to be paid before it can be considered fully paid. So not only the par value or the issued price, but also the interest before you can receive the stock certificate. For section 64, it talks about watered stocks or those stocks that have been issued below par value. So the liability here is um, a solidary um, liability between the director or officer who approved it and the stockholder who paid under or below the issued price or the par value. First, if the director or officer consented to the to receive the undervalued asset or property or undervalued consideration, then he must be solidarily liable with the stockholder. Second, if he accept non-cash assets that are overvalued, let's say for example, he accepted a land that uh, only has a fair value of 1 million in exchange of shares that are worth 2 million. So his liability is the difference between the asset received and the actual par value or issued price of the shares. And he's going to be solidarily liable with the stockholder who purchased it. Third, if the officer knows or has knowledge of the insufficiency of the consideration received but did not object in writing, he is also solidarily liable for the watered stocks. Let's say, for example, A is a director and he accepted parcel of land from B, which is only valued at 1 million in exchange for a stock worth 2 million. And C, another director, knew about it but didn't object in writing. So three of them will be solidarily liable for the difference between the issued price or the par value and the consideration received. Section 65 talks about interest on unpaid subscriptions. As what I have mentioned earlier, subscription contracts may contain interest clause. Let's say, for example, it says 10% interest per annum. Then that's the interest rate that they should follow. But if there's no interest rate fixed on the subscription contract, then they must follow the legal limit on the interest rates depending on the current laws in the Philippines. And lastly, the interest accrues from the date of the subscription. Let's say, for example, you subscribe to the shares on January 2025, but the corporation got incorporated on March 2025. So the accrual of the interest will start on January and not March because the accrual is based on the subscription date and not the incorporation date of the corporation.
Title 7 Stocks and Stockholders. Section 64 says that when you subscribe to shares, you don't always pay everything upfront. The board of directors can issue a call requiring you to pay the remaining balance on a specific date. If the board doesn't make a call, you're not yet obliged to pay the balance. But once the call is made, payment becomes due. Section 65 Interest on unpaid subscriptions. It means that if you miss the payment deadline after a call, the corporation can automatically charge you interest on the legal rate, currently 6% per year, unless your subscription contract says a different rate. This encourages stockholders to pay on time. Section 66. Delinquency on subscription. The moment you fail to pay on the due date, your shares become delinquent. The corporation must send you a written notice, and if you still don't pay, it has the right to sell those delinquent shares at a public auction to recover the unpaid amount. Section 67 Procedure for Delinquency Sale. Before the auction, the corporation must publish the notice of sale once a week for 3 consecutive weeks in a newspaper and send you a personal notice. The sale itself is a public auction where shares go to the highest bidder who pays at least the amount you owe plus cost. Section 68. When sale may be enjoined, stock means good news for delinquent stockholders. You can stop the auction anytime, even minutes before it starts, simply by paying the full subscription plus accrued interest, penalties, and expenses. Once paid, everything goes back to normal. Section 69. Issuance of certificate of stock. It means that no full payment, no stock certificate. That's the strict rule. The corporation cannot issue a certificate, proof of ownership, for shares that are not yet fully paid. Everything, I mean, preventing anyone from pretending to own shares they haven't completely bought. Section 70. Transfer of shares. To officially transfer ownership of shares, the stock certificate must be properly endorsed and surrendered to the corporation, and the transfer must be recorded in the stock and transfer book. Only then does the new owner become the legal stockholder. Section 71. Transfer by legal representative. If a stockholder dies or becomes incapacitated, only the executor, administrator, guardian, or receiver with proper court authority can sign and transfer those shares. This protects the estate and the corporation from unauthorized transfers. Section 72. Lost or destroyed certificates. If your stock certificate is lost, stolen, or destroyed, you can apply for a replacement. The corporation will usually require you to post a bond and publish a notice so no one can fraudulently use the old certificate. Financial records. Second, minutes of all meetings of stockholders and directors. And lastly, the stock and transfer book. Any stockholder can inspect these books on any business day at reasonable hours and even request copies. This is the law's strongest tool for transparency and accountability. Section 74. This section of the old Corporation Code has been completely repealed in the revised Corporation Code. So there is no longer a Section 74. All rules about corporate books and records are now fully covered by Section 73.
So now, I'll be discussing the Title 9 of the RCC, which talks about the merger and consolidation. So, Section 75, plan of merger or consolidation. So, two or more corporations may merge into a single corporation, which shall be one of the constituent corporation, or may consolidate into a new single corporation, which shall be consolidated corporation. So, the board of directors or the trustees of each corporation party to the merger or consolidation shall approve a plan of merger or consolidation setting forth the following. So, before corporations can legally merge or consolidate, their boards of directors must first create a detailed plan. So, this plan must state the first, the names of the corporation combining, and second, the method and step of combining. Third would be the changes in articles of the surviving corporation in a merger. And for consolidation naman is yung new articles. And lastly, pang fourth is yung any addition provision necessaries. So, in simple terms, think of Section 75 as the blueprint of the combinations of everything that must be clear and written before moving to shareholders approval. Now, let's talk about Section 76 naman po. Stockholders or members approval. So, upon approval by a majority vote of each of the board directors or trustees of the constituent corporation of the plan of the merger or consolidation, the same shall be submitted for approval by the stockholders or member of each such corporation at the separate corporate meetings duly called for the purpose. So, notice of such meeting shall be given to all stockholders or members of the respective corporation in the same manner as giving notice of regular or special meetings under Section 49 of RCC. So, this notice shall state the purpose of the meeting and include a copy of a summary of the plan of merger or consolidation. So, after the board of directors or the trustees approves the plan, it needs the approval ng mga owners or the owners approval of each of those corporation that will merge or that will consolidate. So there are three rules to this. So first, must hold separate stockholders meeting. Second, that must give notice attaching the plan, and last, needs 2/3 vote to pass the merger or the consolidation. So if one of stockholders disagree, they may use their appraisal right that will be discussed by me also in Title 10. So even if stockholders approve, the board can still abandon the merger, and if they do, appraisal rights disappear naman. Now, Section 77, Articles of Merger or Consolidation. So, after the approval by the stockholders or members as required by the preceding section, Articles of Merger or Articles of Consolidation shall be executed by each of the constituent corporation to be signed by the President or the Vice President and certified by the Secretary or Assistant Secretary of each corporation. Setting forth, after stockholders approve, the corporation prepare and sign a formal Articles of Merger or Consolidation. So it contains the plan, number of shares and members, and votes for or against. And third is that asset and liability values. Fourth is the accounting method to combine the records. And lastly is the pro forma or the combined financial information of those corporations that merge or that consolidate. And to summarize this section is the official legal serve as the official legal document submitting to the government to prove the validity of the merger or the consolidation. Now, we'll talk about the Section 78, which is the effectivity of merger or consolidation. So, the articles of merger or of consolidation signed and certified as required by the RCC Code or shall be submitted to the Commission of its approval, providing that in the case of merger or consolidation of banks or banking institution or loan association, trust companies, insurance companies, public utilities, educational institution, and other special corporation governed by special laws, the favorable recommendation of the appropriate government agency shall first be obtained. So, if if the commission is satisfied that the merge or consolidation of this code and existing law, it shall issue a certificate approving the articles and plan of merger or of consolidation, at which time the merger or consolidation shall be effective. So, if upon investigation, the commission has reason to believe that the proposed merger or the proposed consolidation or is contrary to or inconsistent with the provision of this code or existing laws, it shall set a hearing to give the corporation concerned the opportunity to be heard. Written notice of the date, time, and the place of the hearing shall be given to each instituent corporation at least 2 weeks before said hearing. The commission shall thereafter proceed as provided in this code. So, meaning in here is that even if the corporations agree internally to merge, the merger is not yet legally binding. Kasi it becomes valid only when the SEC or the Securities and Exchange Commission approve it. Some corporation like, let's say, banks or insurance companies, they need additional approval from the specialized government agency. So, if the SEC sees possible legal issues, it may call for what we call the hearing na. So, the SEC acts as the final safety check to prevent illegal and anti-competition or harmful merger. Now, let's discuss the last section of this title, which is Section 79, Effects of Merger or Consolidation. So, the merger or consolidation shall have the following effects. So, once the merger or consolidation takes effect, first, there will be corporation becomes one single corporation. Second, the non-surviving corporation cease to exist. Third, the surviving corporation assumes all the rights, privilege, powers, duties, and liabilities. Fourth is that all properties, contracts, receivables, and interest automatically transfers to it. And last, it becomes responsible for all the debts and the lawsuits. So, Section 79 ensures fairness, that corporation cannot merge as a way to escape liabilities or debts. So now, I'm done discussing Title 9. So, its focus is legal procedure combining corporation, and it ensures that merger follow proper approvals and protect creditors and the public. So now, we move on to the Title 10, Appraisal Report. So, Section 80, when the rights of appraisal may be exercised. So, any stockholders of a corporation shall have the right to dissent and demand payment of the fair value of the shares in the following instance. So, as shareholders may disagree with major corporation decision, such as changes to articles affecting the rights. Second, disposal of all or almost all corporate asset. Third is merger or consolidation, which I already said in Title 9. And fourth is the investments outside the corporation primary purpose. So, if the corporation changes direction in a way that stockholders disagrees with, they may cash out fairly. Section 81, how right is exercised. So, the dissenting stockholders who vote against a proposed corporate action, a written demand on the corporation for the payment of the fair value of shares held within 30 days from the date on which the vote was taken. So, provided that the failure to make the demand within such period shall be deemed a waiver of the appraised right if the proposed corporation is implemented. The corporation shall pay the stockholders upon surrender of the certificate or certificates of stock representing the stockholders' shares, the fair value thereof as of the day before the vote was taken, excluding any appreciation or depreciation in anticipation of such corporate action. The steps are: 1. Stockholders must vote no to the decision. 2. Must send written demand within that 30 days period. So, last, and the third is that if the price is disputed, 3 independent appraiser determine the fair value. 4th, payment must be made within 30 days after valuation. So after the valuation, the payment shall be made within 30 days of valuation. So if the corporation has sufficient retained earnings. So this section 81 protects shareholders from being forced to accept unwanted corporate changes. So section 81 gives right to those shareholders who don't want to agree to what the corporate wants to change. So, Section 83. When right to payment ceases. So, no demand for payment or under the title may be withdrawn unless corporation consents thereto. If, however, such demand for payments is withdrawn with the consent of the corporation, action is abandoned or rescinded by the corporation or disapproved by the commission where such approval is necessary, or if the commission determine that such stockholder is not entitled to be paid by the fair value of his shares, then the status as the stockholder shall be restored, and all dividend distribution which would be accrued on the shares shall be paid to the stockholders. The right to the payments ends when the stockholders withdraws the demand with the corporation consents, and the corporation action is abandoned or disapproved, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, rules that the stockholder was not entitled. So, if the reason for appraisal disappears, the stockholders become irregular stockholders again. Now, Section 82. Section 82 naman is the effect of demand and termination of rights. So, from the time of demand for the payment of the fair value of a stockholder's shares until either the abandonment of the corporate action involves or the purchase of the said shares by the corporation, all rights accruing to such shares, including voting and the dividend rights, shall be suspended na. In accordance with the provision of this RCC, except the right of such stockholders to receive payment of this fair value thereof provided that if this dissenting stockholders is not paid the value of the said shares within that 30 days after the award, the voting and dividend rights shall immediately be restored. So meaning that after the shareholders demand the payment and within the 30 days of the valuation, that stockholder was not paid, all of the right shall be restored to that stockholders. So once a stockholders demand appraisal, voting and dividend rights are suspended. So and if payment is not made within that 30 days after valuation, all of his rights or her rights are restored. And last, if the corporate action is abandoned, rights are restored automatically. So Section 82 ensures the fairness while the payment issue is being settled. Now, Section 84. So, who bears cost of appraisal? So, the cost and expenses of appraisal shall be borne by the corporation. So, unless the fair value ascertained by the appraiser is approximately the same as the price within the corporation may have offered to pay that stockholders, in which case they shall be borne by the latter. In the case of an action to recover such fair value, all costs and expenses shall be assessed against the corporation unless the refusal of the stockholder to receive payment was unjustified. So normally, the corporation pays the appraisal cost. So, however, there's an exception. First, if the appraisal value is almost same as what the corporation originally offered, stockholders pays. Second, if the stockholders' refusal was unreasonable in action, then stockholder may shoulder the cost. So, Section 84 prevents naman the abuse of stockholder of their appraisal right. Now, Section 85, the last section of Title 10. So, Section 85, notation on certificates, rights of transferee. Within 10 days after the demanding payment for shares held, a dissenting stockholder shall submit the certificate of stock representing the shares to the corporation. For notation that such shares are dissenting shares, so failure to do so shall at the option of the corporation terminates the rights under this title if shares represented by the certificates bearing such notation are transferred and the certificates consequently cancelled. The rights of the transferor are as dissenting stockholders under this title shall cease, and the transfer shall have all rights of a regular stockholders, and all dividends distribution which would have accrued on such shares shall be paid to the transferee. So within 10 days, dissenting stockholders must submit their certificates so the corporation can tag them as dissenting shares. Second, if they do not, corporation may cancel their appraisal right. Third, if the dissenting shares are sold, the new owners become the regular stockholders and with no appraisal right. Then, the appraisal right is personal. It does not transfer to buyers. So, to summarize, the focus of Title 10 or the appraisal right is the protection of dissenting stockholders, and it is legally ensures that stockholders can demand fair value when major changes occur that affect investment rights. And that's all for me. Thank you.